Hey guys, this is Anthony Morganti from AnthonyMorganti.com. This is episode 8 of the video series where we're taking a look at On1 Photo 10. In this episode, we're going to take a look at resize. Now, if you're someone that prints your images, whether you're printing them yourself or you're sending them off to a lab, I think On1 Photo 10 resize is essential to your workflow, particularly if you're cropping images. And why do I say that? Well, look at this image here. It is a really substantially cropped image. And that's a boring image. But when you crop it, it's a much more dynamic image. And this is common for wildlife photographers and sport photographers. Many of us can't afford these big, long lenses that give us this tremendous reach. So we get an image like this quite often. But that looks a lot better. But I want to print this. Let's say I want to print this to an 8 by 10. Well, if you look at the pixel dimensions, it's 1123 by 898. Now, if you go to any lab's website, somewhere on their website, they're going to have recommended file size for a print. And I'm at the Adorama Learning Center right now. And if you just look, they have three different: good, better, and best. Well, we're spending money and we really want the best print possible. All right, so let's assume we want the best print possible. If you look at a 4 by 6, the minimum dimensions in pixels required for a really nice 4 by 6 is 1200 pixels by 1800 pixels. And if you look, I am well under that for this image here. So my image won't even print a decent 4 by 6. I want to print an 8 by 10. I'll need 2400 by 3000. And just not going to cut it. This is where resize comes in, because resize does a great job of upscaling an image, and it does so without giving you artifacts, noise, and you don't really lose any detail. Now, if you could use the print module in Lightroom, or you could print from Photoshop, and they will upscale an image, but they don't do as good a job. I'm going to just tell you flat out. You're going to get artifacts, and you're going to lose detail if you use a print module in Lightroom or Photoshop to upscale a print. So Resize is worth the price of admission. It really is. It's a great, great app. So we're going to send this image over to Resize. I want to print an 8 by 10. Now I pre-cropped it in Lightroom. I like the crop tool in Lightroom and I like the crop tool in Photoshop, and I'm used to it. So you could send an image pre-cropped into Resize, or you could crop inside a Resize, and I'll show you how to do that. But we're going to send this over to On1 Resize. Now, it's a raw file, so we have to create this PSD. And I mentioned many times I've changed a couple settings here. I do ProPhoto RGB, and I have the resolution at 360, and that's only because I use an Epson printer to print. And I was talking to an Epson rep, and he told me that they recommend for their printers that use a resolution of 360. I've never been able to find that in writing on the internet or anything like that. I'm just going by what the man told me. So take that for what it's worth. Now, since we're sending this off to the lab, I'm going to change it to 300. All right, so we're going to edit, and now it's going to create this PSD file, send it over into Resize. And while it's doing that, real quick, in the description below will be a link and a discount code. If you're interested in purchasing On1 Photo 10, use that discount code and you'll save 20%. All right, we're opened up in On1 Resize. I'm going to click reset here and reset it. If you look right here where it says pixel dimensions, where width is 1122 by 898. That's our pixel dimensions of our file. If you didn't pre-crop it, you'd like to crop it now, what you have over here on the left-hand side, you have three tools: the crop tool, the hand tool, and the magnifying glass. The hand tool is just so you can move the image around if you're zoomed in, and the magnifying glass allows you to zoom in. We're going to use the crop tool. When you activate the crop tool, across the top we have some attributes for the tool. This drop down is really handy. Right here you could come in and you could get a preset ratio that you want. So right now, like I mentioned, I have it preset to 4 by 5 for an 8 by 10 print. But let's say we wanted to do a 1 by 1 square print. That'll give you a crop overlay with handles to give you a 1 by 1 print. And you could grab any of the handles and it will keep that ratio. Then once you crop it in, then you would just grab the image itself and you could slide it around to get it exactly how you want it cropped. The drop down includes paper ratio. So if you're going to go to, let's say, an A3 paper, it'll give you the exact overlay for an A3 paper. and then you could drag that around, or any paper for that matter. Photographic sizes, again, 8 by 10. That's what I'm doing. Square sizes. It has video dimensions if you prefer to do some type of video dimension. But again, I already pre-cropped mine. You could use that drop down, or you could come over here and you could physically just type in the specific numbers you want for the width and the height. If you're a landscape photographer and you accidentally took an image that's a little crooked, you could use the level tool. And what you would do then is once that's activated, you would draw along your crooked horizon and the crop tool automatically straighten it, all right, if you want to do that. Or if you prefer, you could just use this slider and do it manually. These will flip the image 90 degrees clockwise or counterclockwise. And when you're done with your crop and you're satisfied with it, you'd click Apply. Now I'm going to click Reset. And we're going to turn off the crop tool, go to the hand tool there. And we'll reset down here again. And we're ready to rock and roll. Typically what I do, since I crop ahead of time, is I will jump right over here to document size. And you can see right now that up above it, we're showing that we're having pixel width 1122 by 898. It's currently showing in centimeters, 9.5 centimeters by 7.6. I could go to the drop down and change that to pixels, so it's giving me the pixels, or to inches. Now, since I'm doing an 8 by 10, I'm going to put this as inches. And all I need to do now is I could manually come in here. For the width, I'll put in 10, and you'll see that the height automatically got put to 8. So I'm really all set. Resolution I could change here if I want to. You also could do that in the crop tool up here. So if your resolution's 240 or something, you want to change it to 300, you could do that here if you want, but typically I never have to. I send it over at the correct resolution. And you're ready to rock and roll. Now, if you prefer, there is a drop down here, and the drop down has different sizes that are similar to what was up above when we were using the crop tool. So let me show you specific paper, that A3 paper. Remember we did that? If I do that here, it automatically opens the crop tool, and then it has the handles, and then I could actually just recrop the image if I so choose. So that's something to be aware of, that that drop down will automatically um, activate the crop tool in many cases. Typically, for me, I know what size I want. I just manually put it in there. I'm good to go. 8 by 10, and I'm ready to rock and roll. Now, below that we have settings, and then we have these four different add-ons. I'm going to call them: sharpening, film grain, tiling, and gallery wrap. Usually, for me, I'll just tell you how I do it. I don't do any sharpening here because I'm using Lightroom, and I'll sharpen there, or I'll sharpen in another third-party application. Uh, I'm going to show you how to sharpen here, but I really don't recommend it. It's a little tricky, I'd say, best way to put it. Film grain, I'm never that artsy. So you want to add grain to the image, you could do that here. Tiling, that's if your printer only at maximum will print an 8 by 10 sheet of paper, let's say. Um, and you want to print, something that's maybe 30 inches by 40 inches. Then you turn on tiling, and that will print a bunch of 8 by 10 sheets of paper that you will physically assemble later like a puzzle to make your large print. And that's what you would do with tiling. And gallery wrap, if you're printing a canvas print, it gets mounted on a wood frame, and the gallery wrap will print the image properly, so when you fold it over the frame, it looks like correct. It looks nice. Let's put it that way. So that's what gallery wrap does. Now I'm going to come back to settings in a minute. In settings, though, I should say, there's all these different settings here. If you don't want to ever mess with settings, you could come over here to presets, and you could see that there's these different presets. And if we go to a Canon canvas, remember I talked about gallery wraps. Let's say I wanted to do an 8 by 10 gallery wrap, and I click on that preset. It automatically will set the image up so that it will print properly for this gallery wrap. Not only that, it automatically does the correct settings for the general settings on how it's going to upsize the image. It also will add the appropriate amount of sharpening, and it will set the gallery wrap parameters so it prints properly on this paper. That's, a lot faster and easier way. So if you know you're using a certain type of paper, whether Canon, Epson, or HP, just come right over here and pick it. And it will automatically do the correct amount of sharpening for that image and the correct settings for upsizing it to the size you want. Um, in my case, I want to do a photo lab. I'm going to send it off to a lab, and I'm doing an 8 by 10. So with picking that 8 by 10, it automatically opens up the crop tool again. So we could crop it. I don't, I'm just applying the crop because it's the way it is. And it sets sharpening properly to what I need the sharpening to be. So you could come over here and do a preset and it will automatically take care of most of the settings over here for you. The only thing it's not going to do obviously is film grain because that's kind of an already add-on. Tiling because that's, it doesn't know what type of printer you're using. It's going to assume your printer can handle the biggest paper that you're picking over here. Or um, so those two things actually, and it does do gallery wrap. So we're going to reset this again. And we're going to come in here again, and we're going to put in an 8 by 10. All right, so I have this 8 by 10 I want to print. The settings. Let's close that, give us a little more room. There's two different drop downs here. Typically, I use a preset or a setting that is in one of these drop downs. You'll see here that there's 6. And there's general purpose is what I use quite a bit. For most images, it works great. Low resolution JPEG I never use. I have no, I'm going to send a low resolution JPEG. I'm going to print something to, or I'm going to send something to Facebook or something like that. I just do it from Lightroom. I don't need to come in here to do it. So I never use that. Portrait, I personally never use it, but a lot of photographers I know, when they're going to print a portrait, they like to come in here. If they're going to print a really large portrait, and their camera doesn't have the resolution, native resolution to print a large portrait, they'll come in here and do the portrait setting here. Typically, I never have to. I use D800E in the studio that has really high resolution, gives you really big prints as it is. And typically, I don't have to crop because I'm framing properly for the portrait. I'm capturing it in camera properly. I don't have to crop. So I typically don't need to do that here. Landscape images are great. It works great. It will do the correct settings for a landscape image. High detail, personally, I use this for fur and feathers. So for the bird, I will click on high detail. Then there's custom. Now, high detail, as you see, I'll click it. You'll see that it automatically will set these sliders where it needs to be. We'll go back, let's say, to general purpose, and you can see the sliders are in different positions. Low resolution JPEG, portrait, landscape, and so on. So this drop down will give these put these sliders in the correct setting for whatever you're trying to accomplish. That's what I do. I never come in here and touch these settings on these sliders outside of using the drop down because quite frankly, I don't really know exactly what these sliders do to the image when it's getting upscaled. I've never really found satisfactory documentation that explains what these sliders do. I mean, you can kind of get an idea that the texture, is going to do something with the texture of the image. The smoothness is how smooth, I guess, the edges are. And you can see when you're in high detail, smoothness is at 0 because you're trying to get every bit of detail out of the image. Who knows what threshold does? So really, I've looked around. I haven't seen anything that gives me a satisfactory description of what these sliders do. That is why I only use these presets that are in the drop down. And again, I use general purpose for a lot of things like cityscapes, street pictures, things like that. I never use low resolution JPEG. I really don't need to use portrait JPEG because of the way I shoot portraits. Landscape, I will on my landscape images use that. And high detail I use for fur and feathers. Below that, there's method. There's two different methods, general fractors and On1 Resize portrait. So again, I don't need to use the portrait because I'm not using portraits. And when you do that, you lose your sliders. It just does it just does whatever it needs to do to optimize a portrait. So again, I'll just come in here, high detail, and I don't do anything else. I leave it at genuine fractals, and that's what I do there, and my settings are done. Sharpening, I prefer to sharpen in Lightroom or a third-party program. You can sharpen here if you don't have Lightroom or you don't like using sharpening in Lightroom. There's three different types of sharpening. There's progressive, unsharp mask, and high pass. High pass, people prefer that when skin is involved. So if you're doing a portrait, a lot of people prefer high pass sharpening. It just has the amount slider and then it has two protect sliders. The amount slider, obviously, the higher you go, the more it's going to sharpen. What I suggest you do is get the magnifying tool, zoom in on a part of the image like that, and then once it renders, now everything's slow on my computer because I run this screen recording software and it kind of bogs everything down. But once you're zoomed in and it renders, then inch up the amount slider to see if the sharpening is adequate. Just be very careful about over sharpening. If it starts looking, for lack of a better word, I call it crispy, back it off. And that's for all three different types of sharpening. Unsharp mask will give you or two sliders actually, if it ever opens. Everything is slower. I got to zoom back out. Sorry. Wait till the spinning wheel of death like goes away. There we go. We're gonna go back here because then it won't bog down as much. Unsharp mask gives you two sliders, a halo and a mount. A mount is kind of like the volume control of the slider. And halo is how much outside of the actual edge that is getting sharpened do you want sharpened. And all sharpening really is it takes increases like the micro contrast between pixels. You have a light pixel next to a dark pixel. It'll make the light one a little lighter and the dark one a little darker. Well, the halo is how much outside of those pixels do you want it to make light lighter and dark darker. And the more to the right, meaning it's going to look outside of that. And it again, it's there's no formula here. You really have to zoom in and you have to move these two sliders until you get satisfactory sharpening for your eye. It's just always be careful about over sharpening. Now, progressive is the most modern of the types of sharpening, and it's probably the easiest to use. Again, it's just a single slider. With progressive sharpening, I found in On1 product, it's really could be very strong. Meaning, if you go way up, it really over sharpens. You could see it's super crispy looking. Again, you should zoom in and look at it. I strongly suggest that you keep it under 30. Um, of course, it's going to be dependent on your image. Just what I would say is inch it up till you think it's sharpened right. Walk away from your computer for a while, 15 minutes, half hour. Come back and just look at it. It'll hit you right away if it's over sharpened. If it's over sharpened, then you're going to have to back it off. Um, that's what I suggest. I would suggest you use either progressive or unsharp mask or high pass. Um, if you only if you really have to. You would prefer to sharpen, I think in Lightroom's a little easier to do. Also, if you're sending it off to a lab, they will usually sharpen your image for the type of ink and paper they're using. So you might not really need to sharpen your image. So that, is my opinion. Take that for what it's worth. So that's it. Typically what I'll do now, to give you my workflow again, I want an 8 by 10. I'll come in here and I'll have it pre-cropped. I'll come in here and just put 8 by 10. I already have the resolution set. I don't do any sharpening. You can see that our width and height is 2999 by 2400 at an 8 by 10. And if you look at 8 by 10, it's 2400 by 3000. So we are 1 pixel away from being perfect. That's good enough, right? So we're going to click Save. And it will now upscale the image and open it up in Lightroom. Now, what I found with Lightroom, especially with PSD files, when you send a PSD file off to a third-party app, when it comes back, it typically will not update the metadata. And you can see here it's still showing, this is the PSD file, it's still showing the metadata, the image size being the smaller size, which was the dimensions of the original image just about, off by a pixel. All right. What you need to do, it's updated. It's just the metadata isn't showing it. So you need to close down Lightroom and then come in and reopen Lightroom. Now, curiously, it doesn't do this with TIFF files. It seems to only do it with PSD files. And actually, there's papers from um, or articles or something on the website from Adobe that talks about this, how metadata doesn't always get read properly on the PSD files. And I find that kind of interesting since Adobe invented the PSD file, that it doesn't read that as well. But now you can see that the dimensions are correct, but we have this little exclamation point down here. So we're going to click on that, import settings from disk, and it will import the correct settings now. So now we have 2999 by 2400. I could export this from here and send it off to the lab. You could have exported it too from On1. We're going to do a separate video on the export dialog in On1. So we'll cover that someday. But typically, I wouldn't export it from On1. I would just resize it in On1, bring it back in here. Now I have the proper image size for a good 8 by 10, and I would export it from here. And let's say that I am, going to put it on my desktop right here. Choose. We're going to call it Resize. Just for that, we're going to do a JPEG at 100% quality. Most labs want a color space of sRGB, so we're going to leave that at sRGB. We're not going to resize it at all. Our resolution is going to be 300 because that's what we had it set at, remember? Now this is where you could do some output sharpening here. Typically, I just output sharpen for screen, even if I'm sending it to the lab. Now, if you prefer, you're printing it on matte paper at the lab, you could do that here. Usually, though, I just sharpen for screen, and that's what they come out great. Because again, the lab's going to do some sharpening themselves. I'll do standard sharpening. Metadata doesn't matter whether or not you include it or not because we're printing it. And then we just click export. And then it's exported. There's our image. And it's at the correct size now for a perfect 8 by 10. And if you look at it, this is upscaled and it looks excellent. If we go back to Lightroom and we look at the two images side by side, we hit compare. This is our upscaled image. This is the smaller cropped image. And you can see, well, even zooming in, the small one won't zoom in at the same ratio as the bigger one. So we can't really zoom in far enough to see. But it did a great job. There's really no artifacts. We still have a lot of great detail. So that will print really well. So that's it for this episode of On1 Photo 10. That's how you use Resize. Now in the next episode, I think maybe we'll take a look at layers. Unless someone has a suggestion, leave it below and maybe we'll do something different. But layers is pretty cool. Maybe we'll take a look at that. That's where we're getting a little more like Photoshop when we're messing around with layers. All right. That's it. I appreciate everyone watching my videos. Thank you very, very much. I'll talk to you guys soon.